The Manhattan skyline glittered like a constellation of artificial stars against the night sky, visible in its entirety through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Harrison Montgomery's penthouse apartment. At 45, Harrison had everything money could buy. CEO of Montgomery Enterprises, a Fortune 500 company he'd inherited from his father and expanded tenfold, a collection of sports cars that would make any enthusiast weep, and a black American Express card that had never been declined. Tonight, like most nights, Harrison stood at those windows, tumbler of 30-year-old scotch in hand, feeling absolutely nothing. The numbness had become his constant companion, more faithful than any of his 3 ex-wives or countless girlfriends. The party behind him, ostensibly celebrating another successful quarter, buzzed with New York's elite, politicians, celebrities, fellow business titans, all of them laughing too loudly, drinking too much, and caring too little. Spectacular view, isn't it? Almost makes you forget there are people sleeping on sidewalks 20 stories below, came a voice from beside him. Harrison turned, annoyed at the intrusion into his solitude, to find Eliza Chen, his head of PR, standing beside him. At 38, she was one of the few people who spoke to him without the coating of obsequiousness he'd grown to expect. Is that your not-so-subtle way of suggesting another charity donation, Eliza? Schedule whatever photo op you think necessary. Just make sure it doesn't conflict with the Tokyo meetings next week. Eliza's smile tightened slightly. Actually, Harrison, I've been meaning to discuss our community engagement strategy. It's perfunctory at best. Perhaps if you could spare an afternoon to visit one of the shelters we support. That's why I have you, Harrison interrupted, finishing his scotch in one smooth motion. To care about these things on my behalf. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to mingle. He didn't need to mingle, he needed to escape. The conversations at these events were always the same. Market projections, real estate acquisitions, someone's new yacht. Harrison moved mechanically through his own party, shaking hands, laughing at the right moments, making promises he had no intention of keeping. The dreams had started 3 months ago. Always the same. He was drowning in an ocean of paperwork and dollar bills, gasping for air as his father watched from shore, shaking his head in disappointment. Harrison would wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding. His therapist, the third one this year, suggested it represented anxiety about living up to his father's legacy. Harrison fired her the next day. "Your car is ready, Mr. Montgomery," his assistant murmured discreetly as the clock struck 11, his pre-planned escape. Sudden emergency at the office, Harrison announced to no one in particular as he made his exit, ignoring the disappointed looks from women who had hoped to be his entertainment for the night. The elevator descended smoothly, 58 floors of separation from the falseness above. Harrison loosened his tie, feeling like it had been strangling him all evening. The underground parking garage was eerily quiet, his footsteps echoing off concrete walls. "Good evening, Mr. Montgomery," his driver said, opening the door to the Bentley. "Not to the office, James, just drive anywhere." The surprise was evident in the older man's face, but he nodded professionally. "Yes, sir." As they pulled into the late-night Manhattan traffic, Harrison closed his eyes, leaning back against the leather seat. The restlessness was worse tonight, the emptiness deeper. There was a gnawing sensation in his chest that no amount of acquisition or achievement seemed able to fill. The car slowed to a stop at a red light. Outside his window, Harrison noticed a small, unassuming diner, its neon sign flickering weakly in the night. Rosie's all-night diner. Through the window, he could see it was nearly empty. "Stop the car." "Sir?" James looked confused. "I said stop the car. I'm getting out here." "Here, sir. This isn't exactly your usual establishment." Harrison was already opening the door. "Take the night off, James. I'll call when I need you." The diner's bell jingled as he entered, immediately drawing the attention of the handful of patrons. A couple of taxi drivers, an elderly man with a newspaper, and a young woman typing furiously on a worn laptop. The linoleum floor was scrubbed, clean but marked with decades of use. The air smelled of coffee and grease. "Sit wherever you like, honey. I'll be with you in a minute," called a waitress from behind the counter. She was perhaps in her late 30s, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, laugh lines around her eyes, and hands that moved with efficient grace. Harrison chose a booth by the window, feeling oddly conspicuous in his tailored Armani suit. The waitress approached, notepad in hand, name tag reading Sarah. "What can I get you?" she asked, then paused. A flicker of something, recognition, crossing her face. "Just coffee. Black." Sarah nodded, studying him with curious green eyes. "Rough night or early morning?" The question caught him off guard. His employees didn't ask personal questions. His friends, if he could call them that, certainly didn't inquire about his emotional state. "I honestly don't know anymore," he found himself answering. She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her whole face. "Those are the worst. Say hind. Coffee coming right up." As she walked away, Harrison felt a strange sensation, as if he'd seen her somewhere before, not at any society function or business meeting, somewhere else. The feeling persisted as she returned with his coffee, setting it down carefully before him. "You sure I can't get you anything else? Marie makes a mean apple pie." Harrison looked up, meeting her eyes, and felt something shift inside him. Like tectonic plates moving after decades of stability. "Do I know you from somewhere?" he asked abruptly. Sarah's smile faltered slightly, a shadow passing over her features. "I don't think so. I'm pretty sure I'd remember serving coffee to a guy in a $3,000 suit." But there was something in her voice, a slight tremor that suggested otherwise. She knew. Somehow she knew him. And as she turned away to serve another customer, Harrison felt, for the first time in years, something pierce the numbness, a sharp, unexpected curiosity. He stared into his coffee, the black surface reflecting his face distorted and unfamiliar. While outside the diner window, the lights of his city, his empire, continued to shine, suddenly seeming very far away. 3 days had passed since Harrison's unexpected visit to Rosie's diner, yet Sarah's face haunted his waking thoughts and infiltrated his dreams. The unsettling familiarity, the way her eyes seemed to recognize him, it was a puzzle his methodical mind couldn't solve. Twice he had instructed his assistant to clear his evening schedule with intentions of returning to the diner, and twice he had stopped himself, questioning his own unusual fixation. "You've been distracted all morning, Harrison." Gregory Walters, his CFO and oldest associate, watched him from across the conference table. The board meeting had concluded, and they were alone in the sleek room with its panoramic view of Central Park. "Just considering the Singapore expansion," Harrison lied, smoothly gathering his papers. Gregory's gray eyebrows lifted slightly. "We settled that 20 minutes ago. You agreed to everything without a single objection." He leaned forward. "Is this about the Sullivan deal? Because I've known you since Princeton, and you only get this distracted when something's eating at." Harrison waved a dismissive hand. "I'm fine, just need more sleep." "Sleep?" Gregory laughed. "Since when do you sleep more than 4 hours a night? No, this is something else." He paused, studying Harrison carefully. "Or someone else?" Before Harrison could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent message, a development he would typically, "Welcome to escape personal interrogation," except this particular message froze the blood in his veins. "Fire at Montgomery Foundation Homeless Shelter on East 117th Street. 6 injured, including a shelter worker. PR team requesting your presence." Harrison's hand tightened around his phone. "I have to go." "What is it?" Gregory asked, concern evident in his voice. "Fire at one of our shelters. Eliza wants me on site." Gregory looked genuinely surprised. "And you're actually going? Since when do you do on-site crisis management?" Harrison was already heading for the door. "Since people got hurt in a building with my name on it." The truth was more complicated. As his driver navigated through midtown traffic, Harrison couldn't stop thinking about the timing. Just days after his strange encounter, a fire at one of his shelters, it felt connected, though he couldn't rationalize how. The scene at East 117th Street was chaotic. Fire trucks, police cars, news vans gathering like vultures. Eliza met him at the security perimeter, looking simultaneously shocked at his appearance and relieved. "I didn't actually expect you to come," she admitted, guiding him through the crowd. "The fire was contained to the kitchen area. Most residents have been temporarily relocated to our Brooklyn facility." Harrison barely heard her. His eyes scanned the crowd, though he wasn't sure what or who he was looking for. "What about the injuries?" he asked. "Minor, for the most part. One shelter worker inhaled quite a bit of smoke, trying to make sure everyone got out. She's still being treated on site." A paramedic van stood with its back doors open, and Harrison found himself walking toward it, ignoring Eliza's continued briefing. Seated on the edge of the ambulance, oxygen mask in hand, hair escaping from that practical ponytail, was Sarah. Their eyes met, and time seemed to suspend itself. There was no surprise in her gaze, only a weary resignation, as if she had been expecting him all along. "You work here," he said, the pieces suddenly shifting into place. "That's how you recognized me." Sarah removed the oxygen mask. "Part-time. I work a lot of places, Mr. Montgomery." Her voice was hoarse from the smoke. "You should keep that on," Harrison said, gesturing to the mask. "And you should have installed better fire suppression systems," she countered, though there was no real venom in her words, just exhaustion. A paramedic approached. "Ms. Winters, we really should transport you to the hospital for observation." "I told you I'm fine," Sarah insisted. "I need to check on my residents." "Your residents are taken care of," Harrison interjected. "You, however, need medical attention." Sarah's eyes flashed with unexpected fire. "Don't pretend you know what my residents need. Most of them have been abandoned by enough authority figures in their lives without their supposed benefactor deciding when to care." The words hit Harrison with unexpected force. He took a step back, genuinely stung. "Sarah," called a voice from the crowd. A thin, elderly man with a worn duffel bag made his way toward them. "Sarah, they're saying we have to go to Brooklyn, but my doctor's appointment is tomorrow, right here in Harlem." Sarah's expression softened immediately. "Mr. Ellis, don't worry, we'll figure it out." She turned to Harrison, challenge in her eyes. "Unless Mr. Montgomery here has a better solution." Harrison found himself speaking before thinking. "I'll arrange transportation for Mr. Ellis to his appointment tomorrow, and for anyone else with local commitments." Surprise flickered across Sarah's face, quickly replaced by suspicion. "That's unexpectedly considerate." Harrison felt an unfamiliar heat rising to his face. Was he actually embarrassed? "I'm not completely heartless, Ms. Winters." "Sarah," she corrected, then hesitated. "Thank you. Mr. Ellis has been waiting 3 months for this specialist appointment." The elderly man studied Harrison with rheumy eyes. "You're Richard Montgomery's boy, aren't you? I'd recognize those eyes anywhere." Harrison stiffened. "No." One mentioned his father casually. "You knew my father?" "Worked for Montgomery Construction back in the 70s before your daddy made it big. He fired me when I got injured on the job." The old man chuckled without humor. "Funny how things come around. Now I'm sleeping in a building with his name on it." Before Harrison could respond, a commotion near the shelter entrance drew their attention. A young woman was arguing with a firefighter, trying to get back inside. "My photos, all I have left, of my mom is in there." Sarah stood up, swaying slightly. "That's Jessie, her mother died last year." Without thinking, Harrison strode toward the building, Eliza calling after him. He approached the fire chief, unconsciously adopting the commanding presence that served him in boardrooms. "What's the situation inside?" The chief looked him over. "And you are?" "Harrison Montgomery. The building belongs to my foundation." Recognition. Dawned. "East wing is cleared, but there's still some smoke. We can't let civilians in yet." "I'm not a civilian," Harrison replied. "What room?" The young woman looked up, hope sparking in her tear-streaked face. 213. There's a small wooden box under the bed, please." Harrison removed his suit jacket, ignoring Eliza's protests and the absurdity of what he was about to do. When had he last done anything genuinely risky? Anything that didn't involve market, shares, or acquisitions? 20 minutes later, he emerged, suit ruined, face streaked with soot, but clutching a small wooden box. The expression on Jesse's face as he handed it to her, pure, unadulterated gratitude, sent an unfamiliar warmth through his chest. As he made his way back to Sarah, who was watching him with undisguised astonishment, he noticed she was holding something in her hands, a worn photograph. "You dropped this," she said quietly, extending it toward him. "It fell from your wallet when you gave your jacket to that firefighter." Harrison froze, recognizing the image immediately. Himself at 10 years old, standing beside his father at a construction site, one of the few times Richard Montgomery had bothered to include his son in his work. But as he reached for the photo, their fingers brushed and Sarah's sharp intake of breath matched his own sudden realization. "Your mother," he said, the impossible connection finally crystallizing in his mind. "She was our housekeeper, Evelyn." Sarah's green eyes, so like her mother's, filled with tears she clearly had no intention of shedding. "For 7 years, until your father fired her for stealing." Her chin lifted, which she never did. The world tilted beneath Harrison's expensive shoes as long-buried memories resurfaced. A kind woman who snuck him cookies when his father wasn't looking, who bandaged his scraped knees and read him stories when his mother was at her charity functions, and a little girl with auburn pigtails who sometimes came to the house on school holidays. "You used to hide in the library," he whispered. "You loved the atlas. You said you were going to visit every country in it someday." A single tear escaped, tracing a path down Sarah's cheek. "And you promised to take me in your private jet when you grew up." The silence between them hummed with decades of divergent paths and unspoken histories. From the perimeter, Eliza called his name, pointing to her watch. "Press conference time." "I have to go," Harrison said, suddenly reluctant. Sarah handed him back the photograph, her expression unreadable. "Yes, you do. You always have somewhere more important to be, don't you, Harrison Montgomery?" As he walked away, the photograph burning a hole in his pocket, Harrison couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in his carefully constructed world, like discovering a door in a house you'd lived in for decades but never noticed before. A door that once seen demanded to be opened. Harrison paced the length of his office, the Manhattan skyline a blur beyond the windows. The press conference after the shelter fire had gone well. The PR team praised his hands-on approach and personal commitment, phrases that now scraped against his conscience like sandpaper. 2 weeks had passed, and he'd thrown himself into work with manic intensity, as if spreadsheets and acquisitions could drown out the echoes of Sarah's words. "You always have somewhere more important to be, don't you?" He stopped at his desk, picking up the framed photograph he'd unearthed from storage, himself and his father at the construction site. He'd spent hours staring at it, trying to remember more about Evelyn Winters and her daughter. How had he forgotten them so completely? His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Montgomery, Mr. Walters is here." Gregory entered without waiting for a response, a manila folder in his hand and concern etched on his face. "We need to talk, Harrison. If this is about the Tokyo deal, it's about Sarah Winters." Harrison froze, his expression carefully neutral. "What about her?" Gregory placed the folder on the desk. "You asked me to look into the shelter worker from the fire." "I did." He hesitated. "You might want to sit down." "I'll stand." Gregory sighed. Sarah Elizabeth Winters, 39. Born in Queens to Evelyn Winters, single mother. Bachelor's degree in social work from QNY. Completed over 8 years while working multiple jobs. Currently employed at 3 locations. Rosie's Diner on night shifts, Montgomery Foundation Shelter as resident coordinator, and part-time at Harlem Community College teaching adult literacy. Harrison frowned. 3 jobs? The foundation position alone should provide adequate. Your foundation pays shelter workers barely above minimum wage, Harrison. The criticism stung, especially coming from Gregory, who rarely questioned Harrison's business practices. "There's more," Gregory continued. "Evelyn Winters didn't just work as your family's housekeeper. She was your father's executive assistant at Montgomery Construction for 5 years before that." Harrison's head snapped up. "That's not possible. I would remember." You were young, and your father was very good at keeping his professional and personal lives separate. Gregory paused. She was fired in 1993, accused of stealing design documents for the West Side Development Project. My father's signature project, Harrison murmured. The one that had transformed Montgomery Construction from a regional player to a national powerhouse. The same week Evelyn was fired, a small architecture firm submitted suspiciously similar designs to the City Planning Commission. Your father sued them into oblivion, but the scandal almost derailed the project. Harrison's mind raced, fragments of childhood memories reassembling. And he believed Evelyn had leaked the designs. Gregory nodded. She was blacklisted from every major company in New York, never worked in corporate America again, died of cancer in 2010, leaving significant medical debt that her daughter is still paying off. The room seemed to tilt. Harrison gripped the edge of his desk. Sarah never mentioned any of this. Would you in her position? Gregory studied him intently. Harrison, why are you really investigating this woman? Before he could answer, his assistant's voice came through the intercom. Again. Mr. Montgomery, there's a Ms. Winters here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's very insistent. Harrison and Gregory exchanged looks of surprise. Send her in, Harrison said, heart suddenly pounding. Sarah entered like a storm, purposeful and unstoppable. Gone was the diner uniform and practical ponytail. Today she wore simple dark jeans, a blue blouse and an expression of barely contained fury. She stopped short at the sight of Gregory. I can come back if you're busy, she said, though her tone suggested she had no intention of leaving. Gregory was just leaving, Harrison replied. Ms. Winters, this is Gregory Walters, my CFO. Gregory extended his hand. A pleasure to meet you, Ms. Winters. I've heard a lot about you. Funny, Sarah replied, shaking his hand briefly. I've heard nothing about you. As Gregory departed with a meaningful look at Harrison, Sarah approached the desk, her eyes falling on the photograph. You kept it, she said, her anger momentarily displaced by surprise. I found it in storage. Harrison gestured to a chair. Please sit. Sarah remained standing. I'm not here for pleasantries. I'm here because you've been investigating me. Harrison stiffened. How did you... Small world, Mr. Montgomery. Your discreet inquiries weren't so discreet at Harlem Community College, where the dean happens to be a good friend. I was curious, Harrison admitted. Curious? Sarah's laugh was bitter. Rich. People's curiosity about how the other half lives is just voyeurism with a nicer name. She placed a folder of her own on his desk. Here's what you really want to know. My mother was innocent. She never stole anything from your father. Harrison opened the folder. Inside was a stack of yellowed letters, newspaper clippings, and legal documents. What is this? My mother's defense. Evidence she was never able to present because your father made sure no one would listen. Sarah's voice trembled slightly. She kept everything. Every piece of proof, every letter of rejection, every bill collector's notice. She believed someday the truth would matter. Harrison flipped through the papers, his stomach sinking as patterns emerged. Internal memos suggesting the designs had been leaked by someone with higher access than his mother had possessed. Witness statements never filed with the court, a timeline that placed Evelyn miles away when the alleged theft occurred. I didn't know, he said finally, looking up at Sarah. Of course you didn't. You were a child. Her expression softened fractionally. But you're not a child anymore. Your father's company is now your company. His reputation is your reputation. His sins are not my sins, Harrison interrupted, sudden anger flaring. I had nothing to do with what happened to your mother. Nothing except benefiting from it every day of your privileged life. Sarah's voice rose. While my mother cleaned houses with her master's degree in business administration, while I worked 3 jobs to pay off her medical debts because she couldn't afford proper health insurance after being blacklisted. The silence that followed her outburst was deafening. Harrison felt as though he'd been struck, not because her accusations were untrue, but because they were undeniable. What do you want from me, Sarah? He asked quietly. The question seemed to catch her off guard. She blinked, some of the fire leaving her eyes. I don't know. I didn't expect to ever see you again. Then you walked into that diner, and suddenly everything I've tried to put behind me came flooding back. Harrison moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. I'm sorry about what happened to your mother. Truly, if I had known... You would have what? Sarah challenged. Righted all wrongs? Restored her reputation? It's too late. For that, she reached for the folder, her fingers brushing against his again. This time, neither pulled away immediately. Maybe it's not too late to try, Harrison said softly. Their eyes locked, the connection between them palpable, not just shared history, but something new and undefined. For a moment, Harrison thought she might actually believe him. Then her phone buzzed. Sarah glanced at it, her expression shifting to alarm. I have to go, there's a situation at the shelter. I'll come with you, Harrison said without thinking. Sarah paused at the door. Why? It was a simple question with a complicated answer. Because he felt responsible? Because he was curious? Because for the first time in years he felt something breaking through the numbness of his existence? Because I want to help, he said finally. Sarah studied him, skepticism warring with desperate need for assistance. Fine, but this doesn't change anything between us. The shelter was in chaos when they arrived. A burst pipe had flooded the first. Floor and residents were frantically moving belongings to higher ground. To Harrison's surprise, Sarah didn't immediately dash into the fray. Instead, she stopped at her small office, retrieving a leather-bound notebook. What's that? He asked. As she flipped through pages, emergency contacts, local businesses who've agreed to help in situations like this. She glanced up. Not everyone waits for billionaires to solve their problems. Communities help each other. The gentle rebuke stung, but Harrison recognized the truth in it. He'd outsourced his compassion to foundation directors and PR teams for so long, he'd forgotten what direct action felt like. While Sarah coordinated with local volunteers, Harrison found himself removing his suit jacket for the second time in her presence, rolling up his sleeves and helping an elderly woman carry her belongings upstairs. For the next 3 hours, he worked alongside shelter residents and community volunteers, moving furniture, mopping floors, distributing supplies. His designer clothes were ruined, his hands were blistered, and he'd never felt more alive. As evening fell, the immediate crisis was contained. Harrison sat on the shelter's back steps, watching as Sarah distributed coffee to tired volunteers. She worked with natural authority, knowing everyone's name, addressing specific needs without being asked. These people respected her, not for her wealth or power, but for her genuine care. She approached, offering him a steaming cup. You're full of surprises, Montgomery. He accepted the coffee gratefully. So I've been told. Sarah sat beside him, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of vanilla beneath the day's chaos. Why are you really here? This can't just be about clearing your conscience. Maybe I'm trying to figure that out myself, Harrison admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. Since I saw you in that diner, something's changed. It's like I've been sleepwalking through my life and suddenly I'm awake. Sarah studied him, her expression guarded yet curious. That's either a profound personal revelation or a very elaborate pickup line. Harrison laughed, a genuine laugh that felt foreign in his throat. Neither, or both, I don't know anymore. Her phone buzzed again. Sarah checked it, her face paling. I have to go. Another emergency? Personal, she said tersely, standing. Thanks for your help today. As she turned to leave, Harrison noticed a small silver locket had fallen from her pocket. He picked it up, calling after her, but she was already gone. The locket opened to reveal 2 photos, a younger Evelyn Winters on one side, and on the other, to Harrison's shock, his father, smiling in a way Harrison had rarely seen, his arm around Evelyn's shoulders. The implication hit him like a physical blow. That wasn't the pose of an executive with his assistant, or an employer with his housekeeper. They were involved, came a voice behind him. Harrison turned to find Mr. Ellis, the elderly resident he'd met at the fire. You knew? The old man nodded sadly. Everybody knew, except maybe Richard's family. He studied Harrison's face. You really don't see it, do you? Looking at you and Sarah together, it's like watching history repeat itself. Harrison stared down at the locket, a terrible suspicion forming in his mind. What are you saying? I'm saying you might want to ask Miss Sarah about her birth certificate sometime, Mr. Ellis said gently. Some secrets can't stay buried forever. This locket lay on Harrison's coffee table, gleaming under the soft lighting of his penthouse. For 3 days he'd been unable to bring himself to return it, unable to face the questions it raised. Instead, he'd retreated into research, digging through old family records, company archives, even his father's personal journals, searching for confirmation of what he both feared and suspected. Richard Montgomery had been a distant father, but a towering figure in Harrison's life, demanding, uncompromising, and utterly dedicated to building his empire. The man had shown more affection to his buildings than to his son. Harrison had spent his entire life trying to earn approval from a father who seemed constitutionally incapable of giving it. Now, he wondered if he'd ever known his father at all. A knock at his door startled him from his thoughts. Harrison glanced at his security monitor, surprised to see Gregory Walters standing in the hallway, a thick folder under his arm. "You look terrible," Gregory remarked as Harrison let him in. "When's the last time you slept?" "What's that?" Harrison nodded toward the folder, ignoring the question. Gregory hesitated, then placed it on the table next to the locket. "You asked me to find everything about Evelyn Winters. This is everything." He studied Harrison's haggard face. "You want to tell me why you're obsessing over a housekeeper who worked for your family 30 years ago?" Harrison picked up the locket, opening it to show Gregory the photos inside. His friend's sharp intake of breath confirmed he understood the implication immediately. "Jesus, Harrison. Are you thinking what I think you're thinking? I don't know what to think anymore." Harrison sank onto his sofa. "My entire life feels like a carefully constructed lie." Gregory sat across from him. "What exactly are you hoping to find?" Harrison's laugh was hollow. "Truth? Clarity? A reason why I can't get Sarah Winters out of my head?" He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Did you know my father changed his will a week before he died? Cut out several long-standing charitable commitments and redirected the funds to the Montgomery Foundation with specific earmarks for educational initiatives in Harlem. That's not unusual. Your father changed his philanthropic priorities frequently. What is unusual is that Sarah Winters was awarded a full scholarship from one of those initiatives 6 months later. A scholarship that didn't exist before my father's death." Gregory's expression grew somber. "Harrison, you need to tread carefully here. This kind of speculation could damage not just your family name, but potentially hurt Ms. Winters as well." "I'm not speculating," Harrison snapped, reaching for the journal he'd set aside. "My father kept meticulous records of everything, appointments, meetings, even personal reminders." He flipped it open to a marked page. May 1979. Pregnant. Offered solution. She refused. The silence that followed was profound. "That doesn't prove anything," Gregory said finally. "He could be anyone." "Sarah was born in December 1979, Harrison continued, as if his friend hadn't spoken. "Her birth certificate lists father unknown. My father's solution was likely money for an abortion or adoption. Evelyn refused." He closed the journal with trembling hands. "She kept her child, kept Sarah, and years later accepted a job as our housekeeper, brought her daughter into our home, and my father allowed it." Gregory leaned forward. "Harrison, even if this is true, and that's a significant if, what exactly do you plan to do with this information?" It was the question Harrison had been asking himself for days. What did it change? Everything, nothing. "I need to talk to her," he said finally. "And say what?" "I think we might be half-siblings. Want to grab lunch?" Gregory's tone was gentle, despite his words. "Think about what this would do to her. To you. To Montgomery Enterprises." Harrison stood abruptly. "I need to know, Greg. And she deserves to know too." Before Gregory could respond, Harrison's phone rang. An unknown number. He answered cautiously. "Mr. Montgomery. This is Linda. Chen from Harlem General. I'm calling about Sarah Winters. You're listed as her emergency contact." The world tilted beneath Harrison's feet. "What happened? Is she all right?" "She's stable now. She collapsed at the community college from exhaustion and severe anemia. She gave us your number when she regained consciousness." "I'll be right there." As Harrison hung up, Gregory was already grabbing his keys. "I'll drive you. You're in no condition." Harlem General was worlds away from the private medical facilities Harrison typically frequented. The fluorescent lighting was harsh, the waiting room crowded, the staff overworked. But dedicated. Harrison felt eyes on him as he approached the nurses' station, aware of how out of place his tailored clothing and commanding presence appeared. "I'm here for Sarah Winters," he said, struggling to keep the anxiety from his voice. The nurse eyed him skeptically. "Room 412, family only at this hour." Harrison hesitated only a moment. "I'm her brother," he said, the words feeling strange and yet right on his tongue. The nurse's expression softened. "Room 412, end of the hall." As Harrison walked the sterile corridor, Gregory called after him, "I'll wait here. Take your time." Room 412 was dimly lit, the rhythmic beeping of monitors providing a steady backdrop to the scene. Sarah lay against white pillows, her auburn hair splayed out, making her look younger and more vulnerable than Harrison had ever seen her. An IV drip fed into her arm, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. She turned as he entered, surprise flickering across her face. "You came," she said, her voice raspy. "You called me," Harrison replied, approaching the bed cautiously. "I didn't think you'd actually show up." She tried to sit up, wincing with the effort. "Don't you have a board meeting or hostile takeover to attend?" Even hospitalized, her sharp wit remained intact. Harrison found himself smiling, despite the circumstances. "What happened?" he asked, pulling a chair to her bedside. Sarah sighed. "Apparently working 3 jobs while surviving on coffee, and determination isn't a sustainable lifestyle." She gestured weakly to the IV. "Severe anemia and exhaustion. Doctor says I need rest, iron supplements, and a reality check." "Why me?" Harrison asked quietly. "Why did you list me as your emergency contact?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to voice. "I don't have anyone else," Sarah admitted, looking away. "Most of my friends are shelter residents or colleagues who are just as overworked as I am. And you," she hesitated, "you have resources. Is that all?" Their eyes met, and for a moment the pretense fell away. "I found something," Harrison said, reaching into his pocket for the locket. "The day of the flood at the shelter. You dropped this." Sarah's face paled as she recognized the silver pendant. "You opened it?" "Yes." She took it from him with trembling fingers, cradling it in her palm like something precious and dangerous. "How much do you know?" "Enough to suspect, not enough to be certain." Harrison leaned forward. "Sarah, was Richard Montgomery your father?" The monitors registered a spike in her heart rate as tears welled in her eyes. "My entire life," she whispered, "I've carried this secret. My mother made me promise never to tell anyone. She said it would only bring pain." "But you knew who I was the moment I walked into that diner," Harrison pressed. Sarah nodded slowly. "I've known about you my whole life. My mother kept every newspaper article, every magazine feature about the Montgomery family. She'd point to your picture and say, 'That's your brother, Sarah. He'll never know you, but you should know him.'" The confirmation hit Harrison like a physical blow. He'd come seeking truth, but now that it lay bare before him, he wasn't prepared for the emotions that flooded through him. Anger at his father's deception, grief for the relationship he'd never known existed, and a strange, unexpected relief. "All those years you were in our house," he said, memories rearranging themselves. "You were right there and I never knew. Would it have mattered if you had?" Sarah's question held no bitterness, only genuine curiosity. Harrison considered this. "I was lonely," he admitted. "An only child with parents who were more committed to their separate ambitions than to me. A brother or sister Poon," he trailed off, the weight of lost possibilities hanging between them. "Half-sister," Sarah corrected gently. "From the wrong side of the blanket, as they used to say." She twisted the silver chain of the locket between her fingers. My mother loved him, you know, even after everything, even after he chose his family, his company, his reputation over her, over us. The words struck a chord in Harrison. Hadn't he made similar choices throughout his life? Prioritizing success and status over genuine connection. Why did you come back, he asked suddenly, to New York, to work at a shelter with his name on the building? Sarah's laugh was soft and sad. I ask myself that sometimes. Glutton for punishment, maybe, she sighed. Or maybe I wanted to be close to some part of him, even if it was just his name on a building. My mother never let me hate him despite everything. She said hate would only poison me. She sounds wise. She was. Sarah's eyes drifted shut momentarily, fatigue evident. The scholarship after his death, that was his final acknowledgement, his way of trying to make amends without ever having to face me. Harrison reached out hesitantly, taking her hand in his. It felt small and cool against his palm. I'm facing you now, and I'd like to make amends too, not for his sake, but for ours. Sarah studied him, caution warring with hope in her eyes. What exactly are you proposing, Harrison? Before he could answer, the door swung open. A doctor entered, clipboard in hand, followed by a young woman who froze at the sight of Harrison. Jesse, Sarah said, surprise evident in her voice. What are you doing here? Jesse, the young shelter resident whose photographs Harrison had rescued from the fire, looked between them uncertainly. I came as soon as Linda called me, she said. I didn't realize you'd have company. The doctor, oblivious to the tension, approached the bed. Ms. Winters, your labs aren't great. I'm recommending at least 3 days of hospitalization to get your levels stabilized. Sarah immediately shook her head. I can't. I have shifts at the diner and the community college classes and the shelter residents. We'll manage without you for 3 days, Harrison interrupted firmly. Your health comes first. Easy for you to say, Sarah retorted. You don't understand. What it's like to struggle, to worry about money, Harrison finished. You're right, I don't, which is why I'm offering to cover any lost wages, plus the hospital bill. The room fell silent. Sarah stared at him, emotions warring on her face, pride, necessity, suspicion. Why would you do that? Jessie asked, narrowing her eyes at Harrison. What's your angle? Jessie, Sarah admonished weakly. No, it's a fair question, Harrison said. He looked directly at Sarah, choosing his words carefully. Because family takes care of family. Sarah's sharp intake of breath confirmed she understood his meaning. Jessie and the doctor exchanged confused glances. I'll leave you to discuss this privately, the doctor said diplomatically, backing toward the door. But Ms. Winters, one way or another you need rest and treatment. As the door closed behind them, Jessie remained, her protective stance making it clear she had no intention of leaving Sarah alone with Harrison. It's okay, Jessie, Sarah said softly. Mr. Montgomery and I have some family matters to discuss. Family? Jessie repeated incredulously. Sarah nodded, her eyes never leaving Harrison's face. It seems I have a brother after all. The word hung in the air between them, brother, neither fully embraced nor rejected, but acknowledged at last. After decades of secrets and separation, the truth had finally surfaced, bringing with it both the pain of what had been lost and the tentative promise of what might yet be found. Harrison squeezed Sarah's hand gently. Get some rest. I'll be here when you wake up. We have a lot to talk about. As Sarah drifted into sleep, Harrison remained by her bedside, watching the rise and fall of her chest, marveling at how someone could be both a stranger and blood at the same time. Outside the hospital window, the lights of Harlem glittered against the night sky. A different view from his penthouse, but somehow more real, more vital. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time ever, Harrison Montgomery felt the numbness inside him give way to something warmer, more painful, and infinitely more alive. 3 weeks had passed since Harrison had learned the truth about Sarah, and his life had been upended in ways he couldn't have imagined. The initial shock had given way to a strange new reality. He had a sister, a connection to a world he'd never truly seen before, and a growing sense that the empire he'd spent his life building and maintaining might not be worth the cost. "You can't be serious about this." Victor Prescott, Harrison's executive vice president, stared at him from across the boardroom table. The quarterly strategy meeting had taken an unexpected turn when Harrison presented his new initiative. Doubling the wages of all Montgomery Foundation workers? Establishing a healthcare fund? Educational subsidies? The board will never approve this level of increased expenditure without demonstrated ROI. Harrison maintained his composure, though. Internally, he bristled at the term ROI being applied to human well-being. This was precisely the kind of thinking he would have endorsed just months ago. The foundation is not a profit center, Victor. It's supposed to be about making a difference. It's about tax benefits and public relations, Victor countered bluntly. Let's not pretend otherwise. What's gotten into you lately, Harrison? First, you spend 3 days at a hospital in Harlem. Then you start showing up at shelter events. Now this? He leaned forward. People are talking. The board is concerned. Harrison felt Gregory's supportive presence beside him, grateful at least one person in his executive team understood the transformation he was undergoing. "Perhaps it's time we stop treating philanthropy as a marketing exercise," Harrison replied evenly. "The proposal stands. I'll present it to the board myself." As the meeting disbanded, Victor lingered, his expression calculating. This wouldn't have anything to do with that shelter worker, would it? Sarah Winters? I've seen the visitor logs. Harrison, you've been to that hospital every day. Harrison stiffened. My personal life is not your concern, Victor. It is when it affects the company, Victor shot back. I've worked with you for 15 years. You don't form attachments. You don't take personal days. And you certainly don't overhaul foundation policy for some charity case you met at a fire. It took every ounce of self-control for Harrison not to rise to the bait. The old Harrison would have fired Victor on the spot for such presumption. The new Harrison, the one still finding his footing, recognized the fear beneath Victor's antagonism. Fear of change, fear of losing influence. You've worked with me for 15 years, Harrison acknowledged. That doesn't mean you know me. He left Victor standing in the boardroom, jaw clenched in frustration. In the elevator, Gregory placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. You knew this wouldn't be easy, his friend reminded him. Change never is, especially for people who've profited from the status quo. Harrison nodded absently, his mind already elsewhere. I need to make a stop before our next meeting. Gregory checked his watch. The construction site? We're not scheduled to visit until next week. Not the construction site, Harrison said, as the elevator reached the garage level. Sarah's being discharged today. Gregory's expression conveyed both concern and understanding. Harrison, I support what you're trying to do here, but be careful. This situation with Sarah is complicated. You can't just walk into her life after 39 years and expect everything to fall into place. I know that, Harrison replied, though part of him, the part accustomed to having his every wish fulfilled, chafed at the warning. I'm just offering her a ride home. And the fully stocked refrigerator you had delivered to her apartment? The paid medical leave? The job offer at the Foundation's executive level? Gregory raised an eyebrow. You're trying to fix 39 years of absence with money and influence. That rarely works. Harrison had no rebuttal. He was indeed trying to solve this like every other problem in his life, by throwing resources at it. But Sarah wasn't a business challenge to overcome. She was a person with her own agency, her own pride, her own complicated feelings about their shared father and separate lives. Harlem General's lobby had become strangely familiar over the past weeks. The security guard nodded to Harrison as he entered, no longer surprised to see the billionaire in their modest facility. As he approached the discharge area, he heard Sarah's voice, raised in what sounded like argument. I appreciate everything you've done, but this is too much, she was saying to someone just out of view. I can't accept this. Harrison rounded the corner to find Sarah standing beside a wheelchair, hospital policy for discharge, facing Jessie and an older woman he didn't recognize. Before her sat a large gift basket and what appeared to be several shopping bags. Harrison, Sarah acknowledged his arrival with complicated emotions crossing her face. Gratitude, exasperation, something deeper he couldn't name. "You must be the famous Mr. Montgomery," the older woman said, scrutinizing him through thick glasses. "I'm Eleanor Washington, Sarah's neighbor. She's told us so much about you." Harrison doubted that very much, given Sarah's natural reticence and the newness of their connection. "A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Washington." "You too, though I'd have expected Sarah's brother to visit her before she ended up in the hospital," Eleanor said bluntly, causing both Sarah and Jessie to wince. "Eleanor," Sarah chided gently. "It's complicated. Family always is," the older woman replied with a shrug. "Doesn't change what's right." Harrison accepted the rebuke with surprising grace. "You're absolutely correct, Mrs. Washington. I should have been there sooner." The unexpected humility seemed to mollify Eleanor. "Well, you're here now, that counts for something." She gestured to the gift basket. "Maybe you can talk some sense into her. She won't accept our community collection. Too proud for her own good." Sarah's cheeks flushed. "It's not pride. It's just, you all have so little yourselves, I can't take what you need." "Community takes care of its own," Jessie insisted. "You've helped all of us more times than we can count. Let us help you for once." Harrison observed the interaction with a strange ache in his chest. This was what he'd been missing his entire life. This genuine connection, this reciprocal care that had nothing to do with obligation or advantage. "The car is waiting," he said quietly to Sarah, "if you're ready to go home." Sarah nodded, saying her goodbyes to Eleanor and Jessie, with promises to call if she needed anything. Harrison noted how she carefully accepted the gift basket, but left the shopping bags behind, a compromise between rejecting their generosity outright and taking more than her conscience would allow. "Nice people," Harrison observed as he helped her into the waiting town car. "The best," Sarah agreed, settling gingerly against the leather seat. 3 weeks of proper medical care had improved her condition dramatically, but recovery from years of overwork would take more time. "You didn't have to come yourself. I could have taken a taxi." "I wanted to come," Harrison said simply. The drive to Sarah's apartment in East Harlem was quiet, both siblings lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived at her 5th-floor walk-up, Harrison insisted on carrying the gift basket, despite Sarah's protests that she was perfectly capable. "Humor me," he said. "I've spent too many years paying people to carry things for me. It's good to be useful." Sarah unlocked her door, revealing a small but meticulously maintained apartment. Books lined every available surface. Plants thrived on the windowsills, and framed photographs created a collage of memories on one wall. It wasn't luxurious by any standard Harrison recognized, but it was unmistakably a home. "It's not much," Sarah said, a hint of defensiveness in her voice. "It's lovely," Harrison replied honestly. "You can actually tell someone lives here. My penthouse looks like a hotel suite most days." Sarah smiled slightly at that. "Occupational hazard of wealth?" "Occupational hazard of prioritizing appearance over substance," Harrison corrected, setting the basket on her small kitchen counter. He hesitated, unsure of his welcome. "Can I help you get settled?" Sarah assessed him with those green eyes, so like his own, he now realized. "You have somewhere more important to be, I'm sure." "Not today," Harrison said firmly. Something shifted in Sarah's expression, a softening, a tentative trust. "Then you can make tea while I change out of these hospital clothes." It was such a simple, domestic request that Harrison found himself momentarily at a loss. When was the last time he'd made tea for anyone, himself included? He located the kettle and mugs with some difficulty, aware of how rarely he navigated any kitchen, even his own. When Sarah returned in comfortable clothes, hair pulled back in her practical ponytail, she found Harrison staring at the collection of photographs on her wall. "That's my mother," she said, pointing to a central image of Evelyn, perhaps in her mid-40s, smiling at the camera from a garden bench. "She looks happy there," Harrison observed. She was, most days. Despite everything, Sarah accepted the mug of tea he offered. She never let bitterness consume her, not about your father, not about the false accusations, not about the hard life that followed. Harrison studied the other photos. Sarah, at various ages, always with that determined glint in her eye, often surrounded by people whose affection was evident in their postures, their expressions. "You've built a good life," he said quietly. "Different from yours," Sarah acknowledged. "But yes, good in its own way." They settled on her small sofa, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, creating pools of light on the worn hardwood floor. "I've been thinking about your offer," Sarah said finally. "The foundation position." Harrison tried to keep his expression neutral. "And?" "I can't accept it," she said, raising a hand to forestall his objection. "Not as it stands. It would look like nepotism, and it would undermine everything I've worked for." Harrison frowned. "It's not charity, Sarah. You're qualified, more qualified than half my executive team, if we're being honest." "Perhaps, but people would see it as the rich guy's sudden charity case," Sarah replied. "And they wouldn't be entirely wrong, would they? 3 weeks ago you didn't know I existed. Now you're offering me a 6-figure salary and an executive title." "Because you're my sister," Harrison insisted. "Am I?" Sarah challenged gently. "We share DNA, yes. But what does that really mean, Harrison? We're strangers who happen to have the same father. A father who never acknowledged me, who let my mother struggle, who created this enormous disparity between our lives." She sighed, setting down her mug. "I'm not saying we can't build something. I'm saying we need to be honest about where we're starting from." Her words stung because they were true. Harrison had been trying to compensate for decades of absence. With grand gestures, a habit formed from a lifetime of using money to solve problems, avoid emotions, create distance. "What do you suggest then?" he asked, genuinely open to her perspective in a way that would have been foreign to him months ago. "Start smaller," Sarah said. "You want to help the foundation? Great. Work on those policy changes you mentioned, better wages, healthcare, education support. But do it because it's right, not because your newfound sister works there." Harrison nodded slowly. "And us? Where do we start?" Sarah's expression softened. "We get to know each other as people, not as symbols of privilege and deprivation." She leaned back, studying him. "Tell me something real about yourself, Harrison. Something that isn't in the press releases or annual reports." The request caught him off guard. When was the last time anyone had asked him for something genuine? When was the last time he'd offered it? "I'm lonely," he admitted, the truth surprising even himself. "I have a contact list of thousands, invitations to every exclusive event in the city, and I can't name 5 people who would visit me in the hospital if I were sick." He met her gaze. "That day at the diner, I went there because I couldn't bear another night of meaningless conversation at my own party." Sarah nodded, accepting his vulnerability without judgment. "My turn. I work 3 jobs not just because I need the money, though I do, but because I'm afraid of stillness. When things get quiet, I start thinking about all the what-ifs in my life. What if my mother had taken the money and left New York? What if your father had acknowledged me? What if we had grown up as siblings?" The honesty between them felt fragile and precious. For several hours, they continued this exchange of truths, building a foundation of understanding that money couldn't buy and privilege couldn't fake. As evening approached, Harrison reluctantly prepared to leave. At the door, he hesitated. "There's a board meeting next week," he said. "I'm presenting the foundation reforms we discussed. Would you consider attending? Not as an employee or as my sister, but as someone who understands the needs of the community better than anyone in that boardroom." Sarah considered this. "Will you tell them who I am?" It was the question Harrison had been wrestling with himself. The board would need to know eventually if he intended to officially acknowledge Sarah as his sister. But the timing, the approach, these things mattered. "That should be your decision," he said finally. "But regardless, your expertise would be valuable." "I'll think about it," Sarah promised. As Harrison descended the stairs of her building, his phone buzzed with a text from Victor Prescott. "Emergency board call requested by Lawrence Thorne. Tomorrow 9 a.m. topic, your recent behavior and spending proposals." Lawrence Thorne, his father's oldest friend, chairman of the board, and the man who had personally overseen Evelyn Winter's termination all those years ago. Harrison stared at the message, a cold certainty settling over him. Someone had discovered his connection to Sarah. The past was rushing to meet the present, and the collision threatened everything, not just his position or company, but this fragile new relationship that had awakened something long dormant within him. In his car, Harrison made a decision. He called Gregory. "I need everything we have on Lawrence Thorne," he said without preamble, "particularly anything connected to my father's treatment of Evelyn Winters in 1993. "Harrison," Gregory's voice held warning, "what are you planning?" "I'm done hiding from the truth," Harrison replied, looking back up at Sarah's window, where a light still glowed warmly in the gathering darkness. "It's time to face it, no matter the cost." The Montgomery Enterprises boardroom had witnessed countless power plays, negotiations, and strategic decisions over its 50-year history, but nothing quite like the scene unfolding this morning. Harrison stood at the head of the table, Gregory flanking him like a loyal general, facing the 12 board members whose expressions ranged from curiosity to outright hostility. At the opposite end sat Lawrence Thorne, 78 years old but still commanding respect with his silver hair and piercing gaze. "I've called this emergency meeting," Thorne began, his voice carrying the weight of authority honed over decades, "because I have serious concerns about the direction of this company under current leadership." He fixed Harrison with a pointed stare. "Specifically, Mr. Montgomery's recent erratic behavior, questionable associations, and fiscally irresponsible proposals." Harrison remained impassive, though internally he marveled at how quickly the sharks circled when they sensed vulnerability. These were people who had smiled at him at his father's funeral, who congratulated him on quarterly earnings, who accepted his dinner invitations and campaign contributions. Now they watched with barely concealed anticipation as Thorne moved in for the kill. "For those who haven't heard," Thorne continued, sliding folders across the polished mahogany, "our CEO has been frequenting a homeless shelter in Harlem, spending nights at a public hospital, and now proposes to double foundation wages at a cost of millions. All this coinciding with his unusual interest in a shelter worker named Sarah Winters." The name hung in the air like a challenge. Several board members exchanged glances, clearly already briefed on the situation. "If I may," Victor interjected smoothly, "I've taken the liberty of compiling a fiscal impact analysis of these proposed changes. The drain on company resources would be substantial, with minimal PR benefit, given the limited publicity these initiatives would generate." Harrison watched the performance with a strange detachment. Just weeks ago, he would have approached this meeting with the same cold calculation, the same focus on optics and bottom lines. Now the discussion of human well-being in purely financial terms struck him as obscene. "Thank you for your concern, gentlemen," Harrison said finally, his calm voice cutting through the murmurs. "But I believe you've misunderstood the purpose of the Montgomery Foundation. It exists to help people, not to serve as a tax shelter or PR vehicle for the corporation." "Idealism is a luxury, Harrison," Thorne replied dismissively. "Your father understood that." "Did he?" Harrison picked up a remote, clicking it to activate the large screen behind him. "Let's talk about my father, Lawrence. Let's talk about the kind of man Richard Montgomery really was." The screen displayed a scanned document, a 1992 internal memo from Montgomery Construction's legal department to Richard Montgomery, with Thorne copied. The heading read, "Redesign Leak Investigation." This memo, Harrison explained, explicitly clears Evelyn Winters of any involvement in the design leak scandal. It identifies the actual source as someone with executive access, specifically naming an associate of yours, Lawrence. Harrison clicked to the next document. "Yet 1 week later, my father fired Evelyn anyway, on your recommendation." Thorne's face had gone rigid. Ancient history, irrelevant to today's concerns. Is it? Harrison displayed another document, Richard Montgomery's personal calendar from 1979, showing regular meetings with EW, scheduled discreetly between legitimate business appointments. "My father maintained a relationship with Evelyn Winters for years, a relationship that resulted in a child." The boardroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Several directors leaned forward, suddenly intensely interested. "Sarah Winters is Richard Montgomery's daughter," Harrison stated plainly. "My half-sister." "This is absurd," Thorne sputtered, his composure cracking. "You have no proof." "DNA doesn't lie, Lawrence," Harrison interrupted, producing a sealed envelope. "The results are conclusive. Sarah Winters is a Montgomery by blood, if not by name." Victor, sensing the shifting dynamics, attempted to regain control. "Even if this is true, Harrison, it doesn't justify reckless spending or policy changes. If anything, it demonstrates a conflict of interest." "You're right about one thing," Harrison acknowledged. "There is a conflict here, not of interest but of values." He straightened, surveying the faces around the table. "For too long, this company has operated on the principle that profit justifies anything, including destroying a woman's reputation to protect corporate secrets, abandoning a child because acknowledging her might cost us something, and treating the foundation as a glorified tax shelter rather than a genuine force for good." Gregory passed out another set of folders. "These contain my complete proposal for foundation reforms, including detailed budgeting and implementation timelines. You'll note that the funding comes not from corporate accounts, but from my personal holdings. I'm transferring 20% of my Montgomery Enterprises stock, approximately $2 billion, into an irrevocable trust dedicated to these initiatives." The strategic brilliance of the move wasn't lost on anyone present. By using his personal shares, Harrison had effectively removed the board's ability to block his plans. "Additionally," Harrison continued, his voice steady, "I've decided to publicly acknowledge Sarah Winters as my sister and a legitimate heir to the Montgomery legacy." Thorne slammed his hand on the table. "You'll destroy everything your father built. Richard would never have approved." "My father made his choices," Harrison cut in, "and I've spent my life trying to live up to a legacy built on secrets and selective morality. That ends today." The doors to the boardroom opened, and every head turned to see Sarah enter. She wore a simple blue dress, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders, her posture betraying only the slightest nervousness as she faced the assembled power brokers. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison said, "I'd like to introduce you to Sarah Winters. She has agreed to serve as a special advisor to the Montgomery Foundation, bringing her extensive experience in community service and social work to help guide our efforts going forward." Sarah moved to stand beside Harrison, the family resemblance suddenly striking to everyone present. The same determined set of the jaw, the same penetrating green eyes. "Ms. Winters," Thorne addressed her directly, his tone cold, "you must realize this approach will only damage the company your father spent his life building." Sarah met his gaze unflinchingly. "Mr. Thorne, the company will survive having a conscience. In fact, it might even thrive because of it." She turned to address the full board. "I'm not here to claim anything that isn't mine or to disrupt what works. I'm here because the Montgomery name carries power in this city, and with that power comes responsibility, not just to shareholders, but to the communities we impact." Her simple eloquence seemed to resonate with several board members, particularly the younger ones who had been pushing for more progressive corporate policies. "This is all very touching," Victor interjected, "but sentiment doesn't drive shareholder value." "Actually," Gregory spoke up, sliding yet another report across the table, "studies consistently show that companies with robust, genuine social responsibility programs outperform their peers over time. What Harrison is proposing isn't just morally right, it's good business." The discussion that followed was heated but increasingly productive. As Harrison had anticipated, some directors quickly aligned themselves with the strongest perceived position once they realized Thorne was losing ground. Others genuinely engaged with the substance of the proposals, asking thoughtful questions that Sarah answered with knowledge born of first-hand experience. By meeting's end, a tentative consensus had formed. The foundation reforms would proceed, with quarterly reviews to assess impact. Sarah's role was approved with only 2 dissenting votes, Thorne's and Victor's. As the board members filed out, many paused to introduce themselves to Sarah, political instincts already adjusting to the new reality. Victor departed without a word, his ambitions visibly recalculating. Only Thorne remained, gathering his papers with trembling hands. "Lawrence," Harrison said quietly once the room had emptied except for the three of them, "there's something you should know." The older man looked up warily. "I know it was you. Who leaked those designs in '93, not my father's associate. You needed a scapegoat, and Evelyn was convenient, especially since my father had ended their relationship, and she posed a potential liability with her knowledge of Sarah's paternity." Thorne's face drained of color. "You can't prove that." "Actually," Gregory interjected gently, "we can. Your former assistant kept quite detailed records. She's been very cooperative." Thorne's shoulders sagged, age suddenly weighing heavily upon him. "Your father knew," he said quietly. "Not at first, but he figured it out eventually. He protected me anyway. Just as you protected him when he abandoned his daughter, Harrison observed. A brotherhood of convenient secrets." "What happens now?" Thorne asked, his voice barely audible. Harrison exchanged glances with Sarah, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Nothing," he said finally. "The past remains the past. But your resignation from the board, effective immediately, would be appropriate." When Thorne had left, Harrison turned to his sister. "I'm sorry I didn't consult you about this. Things moved quickly after Victor's text." Sarah shook her head, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "You can take the billionaire out of the boardroom, but you can't take the boardroom out of the billionaire." Her expression softened. "It was actually quite impressive watching you work. You remind me of her, you know." "Who?" "My mother. Your determination. The way you prepare for every contingency." Sarah touched his arm lightly. She would have liked seeing this, her children finally finding each other. The simple gesture, that light touch on his arm, so casual and yet so meaningful, affected Harrison more deeply than the entire high-stakes board confrontation. It spoke of a connection that transcended the business machinations and power plays that had defined his existence. "Come on," he said impulsively. "Let's get out of here." "Don't you have a company to run?" Sarah asked, though she was already gathering her bag. Harrison grinned, a genuine expression that transformed his normally serious face. "I think it can survive without me for an afternoon." They left Montgomery Tower together, declining the waiting car in favor of walking. Spring had arrived in New York, bringing with it that particular energy that made the city feel alive with possibility. As they strolled through a nearby park, Harrison found himself sharing stories of his childhood, the loneliness, the pressure, the rare moments of joy, while Sarah spoke of her mother's strength, their modest but loving home, the community that had embraced them. "I've been thinking," Harrison said as they paused near a fountain where children played, their laughter carrying on the breeze, "about the shelter on East 117th. "What about it?" Sarah asked. "It's outdated, overcrowded, and the repairs after the fire were minimal at best." He turned to face his sister directly. "I want to rebuild it. Not just repair it, completely reimagine it. Housing, healthcare facilities, job, training, childcare, education programs, a true community center." Sarah eyed him skeptically. "That sounds like another grand gesture, Harrison." "Maybe," he acknowledged. "But this one isn't about guilt or making up for lost time. It's about using what I have, resources, influence, connections, to actually make a difference." He hesitated. "I'd want you to lead it, though. Design the programs, hire the staff, set the priorities. You know what people actually need, not what looks good in a press release." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing his offer. "You're serious about this, aren't you? This isn't just a phase you're going through." The question struck at Harrison's deepest fear, that this transformation he felt might be temporary, that he might slip back into his old patterns of emotional detachment and material fixation. He'd spent 45 years being one kind of person. Could he really change so fundamentally? "I don't know if I can promise forever," he admitted honestly, "but I know I can't go back to who I was before. That person was empty, going through the motions of a life without actually living it." He met her gaze. "Finding you woke something up in me, Sarah. Not just because you're my sister, but because you showed me a different way to exist in the world." Sarah's expression softened. That might be the first non-rehearsed thing I've ever heard you say. Harrison laughed. Terrifying, isn't it? I feel like I've been reading from a script my entire life, and suddenly I'm improvising. Improvisation. Suits you, she said, then grew serious again. If, and this is a big if, we pursue this center idea, it has to be done right. No corporate branding everywhere, no strings attached, and the focus has to be on what the community needs, not what makes for a good photo op. Agreed, Harrison said immediately. We'll start by listening. Host community forums, talk to residents, get input from local organizations. He smiled ruefully. I'm pretty good at executing once I know the objective. Sarah shook her head, a small smile playing at her lips. You really can't help thinking like a CEO, can you? I'm working on it, Harrison promised. 6 months later, the East Harlem Community Center broke ground on the site of the former shelter. The ceremony was deliberately low-key. No red carpets or champagne, just community members, local officials, and the team who would bring the project to life. Harrison stood slightly behind Sarah as she addressed the gathered crowd, her natural authority and genuine passion evident as she outlined their vision. This center belongs to all of us, she concluded, looking out at faces both familiar and new. It's built on the belief that everyone deserves dignity, opportunity, and community, regardless of circumstance, background, or bank account. As applause rippled through the crowd, Harrison felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Jessie, now employed as the center's youth program coordinator. Quite a change from the guy who crashed our shelter in a $3,000 suit, she observed wryly. Harrison glanced down at his more modest attire, still well made, but chosen for comfort rather than status. The suit's actually still in my closet. Smoke damage and all, I keep it as a reminder. Of what? Of the day my life actually started making sense. The groundbreaking transitioned to a community celebration with food from local restaurants, music from neighborhood artists, and the easy mingling of people from all walks of life. Harrison found himself in conversation with Mr. Ellis, who had become something of a grandfather figure to him over the past months. Your daddy would be proud, the old man said unexpectedly. Not of all this, he gestured to the construction, sight but of you two finding each other. That's what he really wanted, you know. Too much of a coward to make it happen himself, but I saw his face whenever little Sarah visited your house. He loved her in his way. Harrison considered this. Maybe, but love without action isn't really love at all, is it? Now you're learning, Mr. Ellis chuckled. Took you long enough. Across the gathering, Harrison caught sight of Sarah deep, in conversation with Gregory, who had become an unexpected ally in their initiatives. The two shared a laugh over something, and Harrison felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. His world had expanded in ways he couldn't have imagined. Not just with the addition of a sister, but with genuine connections to people whose values and experiences differed from his own. Victor Prescott had resigned from Montgomery Enterprises the week after the board confrontation, taking a position with a rival firm and several major clients with him. The company's stock had dipped initially, then stabilized and gradually strengthened as their new corporate responsibility initiatives garnered positive attention. Not every shareholder was pleased, but enough recognized the long-term benefits of their approach to maintain support. As the evening wound down, Harrison found a quiet moment with Sarah at the edge of the celebration. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the neighborhood, transforming ordinary buildings into something almost magical. "Thank you," he said simply. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For giving me a chance, for not shutting the door when you had every right to." She considered this, watching the children playing nearby. "You know, my mother always told me that bitterness is a poison you drink yourself, hoping the other person will die. She chose forgiveness, not because my father deserved it, but because she deserved peace." Sarah turned to him. "I think we both deserved a chance to rewrite this story." Harrison nodded, understanding fully what she meant. They couldn't change the past, the decades of separation, the injustices done to Evelyn, the divergent paths that had shaped them into such different people, but they could choose what happened next. "I never thought I'd say this," Harrison admitted, but I'm actually looking forward to board meetings these days." Sarah laughed. "Only you would find joy in corporate governance." "Not the meetings. They're themselves," Harrison clarified, "but the purpose behind them, using all that power and resource for something that actually matters." He glanced at her. "Though I could do without your pointed questions about executive compensation." "Someone has to keep you honest," she teased. "Can't have you backsliding into your capitalist overlord ways." As darkness fell, the gathering began to disperse. Community members stopped to speak with Sarah, sharing concerns, offering suggestions, expressing gratitude. Harrison observed the easy way she connected with each person, remembering their stories, treating their input as valuable. It was a kind of leadership he'd rarely witnessed in his corporate world, one based on genuine care rather than authority or fear. Later, as they walked together toward the car that would take them to the small dinner they'd planned with Jesse, Mr. Ellis and a few others who had become important in their shared life, Harrison felt a sense of peace that had long eluded him. "You know what's strange?" he mused. "I spent my entire life chasing what I thought was success, money, power, status. I achieved everything on that list and still felt empty inside." "And now?" Sarah prompted. Harrison considered the question carefully. "Now I understand that success isn't measured by what you have, but by what you give, by the lives you touch, the communities you strengthen, the love you share." He shook his head with a small, self-deprecating smile. "I sound like a greeting card." "A very expensive, well-dressed greeting card," Sarah agreed, linking her arm through his as they walked. "But sincere, which makes all the difference." The Manhattan skyline glittered in the distance, the same view Harrison had gazed upon countless times from his penthouse windows. Once those lights had seemed like stars in a constellation of power and wealth, cold, distant, untouchable. Now he saw them differently, as homes and workplaces, as lives intertwined in the complex tapestry of the city they shared. Harrison Montgomery, who had once defined himself by the empire he commanded, now found his true identity in the connections he had formed with his newfound sister, with the community they served together, and with the authentic self he was still discovering day by day. The numbness that had been his constant companion had given way to something far more vital: purpose, compassion, and the quiet joy of belonging not to a world of exclusive privilege, but to the greater human family that had welcomed him, at last, home.